All right. Good morning. Happy Friday and happy Canada Day. This is PT on Ice, the daily show. I am Megan Peach. I am one of the lead faculty for rehabilitation of the injured runner, both live and online. And there we go. Okay. So it is Fitness Athlete Friday, and yesterday was Leadership Thursday. And yesterday, Jeff Moore talked about finding your strengths and figuring out what talents you bring to the table. And as I was listening to that podcast, I immediately thought, well, I'm a really good reader. And I don't think that that was his intention. But nonetheless, if you've met me for 5 minutes, you know I love to read. We've probably talked about books that we've loved or that we've both have read. And not only that, but in both our live and online courses for Rehab of the Injured Runner, we always get the question of, do you have any other resources to read? And not necessarily journal articles. And so today I'm going to talk about some of my top favorite reads. Some of them are running related books. Some of them are more just fitness and wellness related topics. I read a lot of journal articles, and I don't necessarily always want to go home at night. I'm tired and read another journal article. Sometimes I just want a fun read, a fun book. And so that's where this topic comes from. Okay, so I've got a few books to share with you today. The first one, I'm just going to start out with it. It is The Lore of Running by Tim Noakes. This is like the granddaddy of all running books, right? So he actually wrote this in 1985. It was first published. And that is, if we think about it, almost 40 years ago. And if we think about running culture in the mid 80s, we get a younger male, very physically fit, very athletic population, very different from the runners of today, right? So the runners of today are more like 40, early 40s. They're usually married. They're usually moms and dads. They're running anywhere from a 5K to ultra runs, but they're not your 20-something competitive male athlete. And Tim Noakes in this book, he speaks to everyone. And for speaking to everyone 40 years ago, it was well beyond his time. So that's why I love this book. This book has everything in it. So this book has everything from the physiology behind aerobic exercise to training programming to different types of injuries. And just to speak a little bit more to how he was really so far beyond his time, I wanted to read you just a little excerpt from this section where he talks about pregnancy and activity during pregnancy. And so he says, anecdotal evidence suggests that highly trained women can continue exercise vigorously without adverse effects to their babies. They found that significantly fewer women who participated in leisure time activity delivered prematurely and suggested that exercise might protect against premature labor. Now, keep in mind, this was 40 years ago, and we are still debating about this topic. So a really, really awesome resource to have. It is a huge book. I've not read the whole thing, but it's a great resource to have if you're treating runners or interested in running. Next one is Exercise by Daniel Lieberman. I've read about half of this. It is very science research dense. So Daniel Lieberman is actually an anthropologist out of Harvard, and but also has an interest in running, has published a lot of articles on running. He was one of the authors or the lead author on some of the articles that originally talked about foot strike and ground reaction forces. Kind of early 2000s, kind of what started that trend towards minimalist shoes and barefoot running. So This is a book on movement and health, but from an evolutionary standpoint. And he has a bit of a different theory than I think most of us probably do. Um, he talks about how, evolutionary speaking, we're not really intended to do moderate or high intensity exercise for 30 to 60 minutes a day or in these short little bouts. Rather, we're really intended as humans to do moderate exercise throughout the day. Um, and so definitely a different approach than I think a lot of us exercise, just kind of based on our daily lives and what we can do, but a really, really good book nonetheless. Okay, next we have Let Your Mind Run by Dina Castor. So this is a memoir, and this is the only memoir in probably my top 10 books, because I feel like memoirs often, they talk about their struggles, they talk about their triumphs, and it's very thematic in that way. But in this memoir, Dina really focuses on how positivity and mindset and her own resiliency and kindness towards others even really played a big role in her success as an elite level athlete. She has set world records in the marathon, in the half marathon, as well as many other distances of running races. And so she knows what hard training is. She knows what it's like to be an elite athlete, but she wasn't always an elite athlete. And I like this book because not only she talks about how those qualities helped her become successful as a runner, but I do think this is very relatable, which a lot of the memoirs I read are more, I mean, being honest, just bragging about their achievements. She is very, very relatable. So I do love Dina Castor in Let Your Mind Run. Next, we have The Sports Gene by David Epstein. So David Epstein is actually a journalist. So very, very different perspective than Exercise by Daniel Lieberman. Daniel Lieberman is a scientist. David Epstein is a journalist, and he's essentially telling a story. So I tend to gravitate towards these books written by journalists who are also using sort of a science approach to back up their story. That's just what I like to read. So in this book, he is talking about genetics and how genetics play a role in our athletic performance or our ability to be athletes. And it is fascinating. This is definitely one of my top reads. And so he talks about things like the 10,000 hour rule. So, or it's a theory really, but how we need 10,000 hours of practice activity to be proficient at that specific activity. He also talks about how genetically we're very, very different in terms of, in terms of how we respond to exercise. And so here's another one where I want to read you a little bit of an excerpt. So in this excerpt, he is talking about research studies that were conducted at different sites in different regions with a lot of subjects. And basically what they did was give these subjects identical exercise programs. Obviously, there are compliance issues, but they had a lot of participants. And so what they found was that, I'll read this here. So the results of the study were consistent in the fact that every member of the study was on an identical exercise program. All 4 sites saw a vast and similar spectrum of aerobic capacity improvement, meaning they saw the same percentages of people at each site improve or not improve. About 15% of participants who showed little or no gain whatsoever after 5 months of training. And then they saw all the way up to 15% of participants who improved dramatically, increasing the amount of oxygen in their bodies could use by 50% or more. So he is just talking about, assuming a little bit, but based on genetics, how we respond differently to exercise. He also talks in here about morphology and performance. So like how your body is made just anatomically and how that relates to performance. So specifically in runners, he talks about a very short torso and long limbs are economically better for running. It creates this longer pendulum. And so these individuals actually have an advantage over somebody who is maybe the same height but has a longer torso and shorter limbs. So he goes all into those details, lots of science, lots of good research to back it up, but he also creates a story out of it. Very, very good one there. Very entertaining. I love this one. This is What Makes Olga Run by Bruce Grierson. So it's the mystery of the 90-something track star and what she can teach us about living longer, happier lives. You read this book and just fall in love with Olga. So Olga is a woman who set, I think, over 20 track and field records in her 90s. So obviously very, very physically active. I think she was 91 and she ran a 60-meter dash in right around 15 seconds. And I don't know a lot of 91-year-olds that could walk that, let alone run it or sprint it. And so a pretty amazing individual that's featured in this book. But really, this book is about aging and what contributes to age and what contributes to aging with being able to maintain some activity as we age and avoiding chronic disease. It's definitely a good read. All right, this one I debated adding in. So this is The Science of Running by Steve Magnus. This book, again, this verges more on training and it's a little science heavy. It feels like you're reading a textbook. I do think it's a good resource. A lot of the times in both online and our live rehab of the injured runner, we get the question of, do you have any resources for, just understanding kind of the running lingo and how to talk to runners and what kind of like training they're talking about when they're using certain training words in their training programs. This is the book for you, if that is your question. This book goes over the physiology behind aerobic exercise, behind running. It gets a little bit into periodization. It talks a lot about training and programming and setting up training programs for different levels of runners. And then it talks about, it really defines well, I think, the types of running. So when you're talking to your injured runners, you might hear them talking about tempo runs or long, slow runs or sprinting even or recovery runs. This book's strength, I think, is defining the different types of variables in a training program. So if you're treating runners or you just want to speak the lingo, The Science of Running is a really good resource to have. And now we're down to my top 3. I've got a lot of books. So Why We Sleep. I think I am probably preaching to the choir on this one. This is by Matthew Walker. It is Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams, but it is so much more than that. This is, I think, the one book that I would recommend every physical therapist to read. I think every healthcare professional should read this book. I think every adult should read this book and probably every parent as well. This book definitely changed how I view sleep. It starts at the basics and kind of goes over the different cycles of sleep, how we sleep, why it's important physiologically, what is happening when we sleep physiologically. It goes into the lack of sleep and how that contributes to chronic disease. And when I say chronic disease, he's talking about cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, other neurological diseases. He is literally talking about every chronic disease out there and its relationship to the lack of sleep. And then I'm talking about like chronic lack of sleep. So fascinating book here. Also talks a little bit about dreams. And then he also talks at the end about societal expectations and how they are influencing our lack of sleep or thinking that we need less sleep than we actually do. This book is a bit research science heavy, so I can read 2 or 3 pages at a time at most, and then I kind of have to take a break, just because it is a little bit dense. But a lot of good information in this book that I think is probably just a need to know as a human. So I found a little excerpt on exercise and sleep, and this is a little bit surprising to me. So I wanted to read it to you as well. So let's see. So he's talking about a specific study that is looking at sleep quality and exercise and basically the intensity of exercise related to sleep quality. So subjects did not consistently sleep better at night on the days that they exercised compared with the days when they were not required to exercise, as one would expect. Less surprisingly is the inverse relationship between sleep and the next day exercise. When sleep was poor the night prior, exercise intensity and duration were far worse the following day. When sleep was sound, levels of physical exertion were powerfully maximal the next day. In other words, sleep may have more of an influence on exercise than exercise has on sleep. And I think that's profound, because usually we talk about how, we should exercise to get better sleep. But really what Matthew Walker is talking about is that we should sleep to get better exercise. So marinate on that for a little bit. This next one is one of my favorites. It may not be your favorite. That's okay. This one of mine, Born to Run by Chris McDougall. Published just over a decade ago now, definitely had an influence in running culture and pop culture, in terms of how we run, how some people change their running mechanics, things like that. So Chris McDougall is a journalist, and I think that's really, really important. And I love this book for its entertainment value. I think it was a great story. He went and spent time with the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico. They have this very unique running culture where they not only incorporate running into their culture and their games and their socialization, but they incorporate it into hunting and gathering as well. So it is very much a part of their daily life and their daily culture. And so Chris McDougall spent some time with these people, and he noticed that they have far less injuries than we do as American recreational runners. So he does incorporate quite a bit of science into this, but I think the important thing to remember is that he is a journalist. He's telling a story, and he doesn't necessarily have the science to back up why these individuals were getting less injured. He made an assumption that it was because of their footwear or lack of footwear. You could also make the assumption that it was their rice and bean diet that contributed to less incidence of injury in these individuals. I think it was a fascinating read. I enjoyed the cultural aspect of it. I enjoyed learning why they run. I would definitely recommend it. Just maybe not take any science or rehab or treatment advice from it. Okay, last one. I'm on my last one. This is my favorite. I saved it for last. This is Training for the Uphill Athlete, a manual for mountain runners and ski mountaineers by Steve Howe, Scott Johnson, and Killian Jornet. Definitely a must-have, must-read resource for anyone working with endurance athletes. This book, by far, does the best job explaining physiology behind aerobic exercise and why we need to actually train at lower intensities in order to be able to tolerate higher intensity work or perform at higher intensities. So, for example, why you would need to train very, very low intensity in order to run a 5K at your fastest pace. It does an excellent job of explaining that. Not only that, but it does a really good job of explaining how periodization is incorporated into longer training plans. It even offers some suggestions of training plans, both for different types of mountain athletes and runners. So it talks about schemo a lot. But here's an example of some of the training plans and periodized plans that he talks about. I like it because he does kind of dive into the ultra running world and talking about training plans that are using higher mileage weeks. So 80 kilometers, mid 70s kilometers for a few weeks on end. And I think that's important because that information is a little bit more scarce if you were, say, looking online or other resources, than it might be for like a marathon or a half marathon training program. So they do an excellent job of incorporating recovery and the importance of recovery, especially into those higher volume training plans. And so I really, really appreciate that. And then they even incorporate some basic strength principles into their programming and introduce strength, offer some basic suggestions for strength training for mountain athletes. So it is geared towards mountain athletes, but I definitely think that it's a necessity for everyone who is treating endurance athletes. So swimmers, cyclers included. Okay. So I realize that book club maybe not does not resonate with everyone, but for the two of you out there who love books as much as I do, hopefully that gave you some good suggestions to add to your reading list. All right, that's all I have for you today. Have a wonderful Friday and an awesome holiday weekend, and we'll see you next time.